This is the Weekend Extra. I'm Pastor Jeff. This is Liz Miller.
What's up?
And we're going to flip around our interview a little bit this weekend because we were just sitting here talking about a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
And we got to talk about the sermon this weekend, talking about healing and allowing God to glorify himself through our pain.
Yeah.
And we just started talking about Liz's story, and I said, let's just talk about that instead of asking me questions, but I'll just ask you questions. So tell your story a little bit. You and Ricky, your husband, is with the Lord now.
Yeah.
But tell your story a little bit, what your journey has been with health and healing and trusting God.
Yeah. So you started talking tonight about healing, and I just felt all of these emotions and all of these feelings of just unknown. Like, why does God move the way that he does? So it reminded me right away of when I was dating Ricky. He had a softball accident. His ankle blew up. He wasn't able to work. He was very frustrated about that. And we went to life group. And at the time, our life group said, well, let's just lay hands and, pray for you in the middle of this. And he walked into that life group with this huge, big old ankle and walked out with the swelling gone.
Wow.
He went to work the next day and he was like, God really loves me. Like, this is great,
awesome.
and just, it was this great, a reason to celebrate and be excited over something that is seemingly small, but like God moved. God was in that place. And so just good things. He went on to do some other things and felt like God had healed him through that. And then a couple years after we got married, he was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And it's interesting you brought up Kat's story tonight because Kat's story played the week after he was diagnosed, and so we kind of came in feeling heavy, like, what are we going to do with this?
And Kat's story, just for people if they weren't there, was Kat was in her early 20s. She was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. It's untreatable, terminal, and the short version is I wound up kind of meeting with Kat and saying, what do you want to do? And I said, this phrase came out, everybody listens to the girl with cancer.
Right.
And Kat was just determined that she was going to glorify God and make Jesus famous. So we shot videos and stuff of telling her story and telling her desire, showed them at church, and they blew up all over the place.
Yeah, so we watched that, and I remember a line, it was a line that she said, God loved me enough to give me cancer.
Yeah.
And previous to that, I had always experienced God's love as like taking our problems away. And so hearing that just kind of set me back on my feet and set my husband Ricky back, and he was like, no, God loved me enough to let this happen to me, and I'm going to honor and glorify him in the middle of whatever this looks like. I'm going to fight it, probably beat it, and we'll get out on the other side, and that'll bring him the most glory of all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was not our story. He ended up passing away several years later, and I was very confused, like probably for the first 2 weeks I thought God promised healing, like he died very suddenly, and we never got closure there. And then about 2 weeks afterwards, I was sitting in a chair, and I was reading the Psalms because David knows grief, he knows pain, and I felt God's presence descend so strong and promise me, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you, and I will be with you in the middle of this, and this story will bring glory to me. And there was such confidence and such like a peace of knowing like, Ricky was with the Lord.
Yeah.
He wasn't in pain anymore. He wasn't aching. All the things that we had prayed for healing, they came to pass. It wasn't the way I wanted. It was devastating for me. I have 4 children, so walking through that was incredibly painful. But the life that God gave in the middle of that depth was something that I would never have known about had that not happened. So hearing the sermon and hearing about healing, and healing looks differently, I just agreed with 100%. I don't know.
Yeah, I told Liz I noticed you out in the.
It's like a ball of emotion, like tears.
I didn't notice that part. I just vaguely, so I can't see that far. So but I noticed you. I was thinking about you, and you really have walked this, sought to honor God through it all, and you prayed for healing, and it was absolutely correct. And you were saying, like, there's even moments of healing. I mean, Ricky's in and out of the hospital a lot. We prayed a lot for him, and he'd get strength and have a setback and move forward and all those kind of things. But when God the ultimate expression of God's love for you and for Ricky and even the kids was not a healing. It was the presence of God. So the hope of heaven, the security you have, the security that the family has, and even the people of God. I think your kids are kind of the church's kids, kind of a thing. But it's different, right? You don't feel abandoned or bitter toward God, even though He didn't give you what you wanted.
I often say, I think surrender in our time of deepest grief is where Jesus meets us. And I think there was a lyric in one of the songs tonight. I actually wrote it down. It was from the gravest of valleys come the pastures we call grace.
Yeah.
And that just hit that was probably where I was sobbing.
Okay.
Just because when you're willing to go to the depths and wrestle and just acknowledge the pain instead of being like, there is no pain, or just sitting in that pain and deciding not to look for hope in the middle of that.
Yeah.
There's so much hope when we choose to surrender that to God and to give Him those graves,
Yeah.
So yeah, I was excited to talk about healing because I do believe that Jesus does heal.
Yep.
And you gave some examples of that. But then to also wrestle and acknowledge the fact that He does not always, and sometimes He gets the most honor and glory when He does things not like we planned.
That's right. And it's not, you don't have to forfeit one to get the other. Like you can, I do. I absolutely believe God can heal. I've seen it. I've seen it and experienced it and can introduce you to the people.
And you prayed for it. You
and
prayed for healing for Ricky,
Yeah, 1,000 times, right? And it's the same prayer.
Right.
It's the same God. But it's His decisions, and us conforming to that allows Him to bring glory to Himself through it. And I really think that we when we struggle with this, it's because we've lost sight of eternity.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, right.
Preach.
Because the reward is heaven. There is no jackpot on the planet that remotely equals anything that God will give us in heaven. And this is where Jesus is like, don't gain the world and forfeit your soul. So I think about something painful like losing Ricky, who I loved to pieces, and everybody would want him for 50 more years, right? You, the kids. I mean, I most of my tears honestly have been for your children, not having their dad. I'm painful. But when you think in light of eternity, it's where you fix your eyes on Jesus and you put your minds on things above and things like that. And it puts the pain in perspective. It puts the journey of life in perspective. Yeah. Because heaven is in its right place.
You mentioned that tonight in the sermon. Jeff referenced the heavens math that there was a blind man. You want to just touch on that a little bit again?
So just when the disciples asked, Jesus and the disciples ran into the man born blind. The disciples asked, is it his parents' fault or his fault? And Jesus is like, neither. Right. Nobody sinned.
Right.
This was for the glory, so that God could be glorified through it.
And now this man is in heaven and probably, we think, can see the billions of people's lives that he affected. So we get we look at ourselves and we think we know what's best, and just to surrender that to God and to offer up in our deepest places and say your way, not mine, will result in depth and growth and the goodness of God in the middle of those times.
Yeah.
So
and I think pain, even what you're doing here, Liz, it's fascinating. If Ricky was alive, if God had miraculously healed him,
which he could have. And he chose not to. That will be something I will always wrestle with.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't go away, right? If he would have told his story, there's all kinds of people that wouldn't have believed it. They would have been like, oh, the medicine, the doctors, miraculous, come on. When you tell your story, everybody believes it.
Because everybody listens to the widow. That's what it is.
It's true. Everybody listens to the widow. And here you are glorifying God through the death of your husband, being a single mom of 4 kids, young kids, and you're glorifying God, nobody discredits that. And that's earth math, heaven math. That's like a heaven math thing, where your platform to glorify God is increased exponentially because of your pain, right? And so it's just when you flip the question, you come out with very, very different outcomes with it, and it's just interesting to think about.
I've loved this conversation. It's been so good, and I'm thankful that we can have these deeper conversations. This whole series has got my brain churning, and yeah, it's been good.
Well,
It's
awesome.
been the Weekend Extra.